Derek, I'm just going to turn to you now for some questions. So what Imelda said is obviously very upsetting, especially the law enforcement response. And you were obviously a very key part of the Utah SACI team as one of their SACI investigators. I think it would be great if you could speak to what you all were trying to do to not only try and rectify the mistakes of the past, follow up on all these cases like Imelda's that had just sat there, but also the interactions with the survivors and their families, and making sure that people like Imelda felt more comfortable when they were telling their stories and being forced to relive, the worst moments of their lives with law enforcement.
Yeah, so my start with the Utah SACI began with my original police agency, Salt Lake City Police Department, where Imelda's case occurred. And I wasn't involved with this case at that time because it wasn't through the actions of Imelda that we even discovered her case. So 2016 is about when I started understanding that SACI, through the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and then eventually Utah, who had taken out federal funding through them to study the problem and work on the specific type of casework, cold case, sexual assaults, and identifying the previously unsubmitted, and what eventually morphed into the partially tested kids, those that had only been, in this case, tested to serology only, or and some others that had outdated methods that they tested to identify DNA. And so the purpose that, as a Salt Lake City detective, it was explained, that we were going to look at these cases. We weren't saying that, I'm not trying to say that we didn't do anything wrong, but it was just understanding that the way that how in 8 years we were doing things different. That's why we wanted to look at these cases. And so how we do things even today in 2025 is not how we did things in, say, 2015 and 2016 when SACI was just starting to take off. It's all learning, and it's just data driven, as well as having these conversations and the experience of survivors such as Imelda. And so while these cases are important to review, it's important, that while there is a certain amount of criticism that comes with it, we're just trying to identify how we can improve our response to these types of investigations. And I think it translates really well to current cases, because with what we learned in our mistakes, we just make ourselves better on the current ones. So that was what our biggest thing. The second thing that we were also looking at was how to improve our victim response and notification process. We used a lot of our SACI funding. Myself in particular, I traveled to many locations across the U.S. to do victim re-engagement. And it was by looking at our protocols, best practices. A lot of our information came again from the BJA program. A lot of it was out of Cuyahoga County, the founders of a lot of this study. We wanted to make sure that we were doing what was best for our survivors, and that they were treated sensitively, with dignity, and kept informed of the whole process throughout the process. We also wanted to connect them with resources. Utah was unique because it was written by a victim advocate. The original grant solicitation was written by a victim advocate, which had the victim at the forefront, because I really believe that had law enforcement written it, they would have written it as, I want to investigate, I want to catch bad guys, but we need to be able to also provide the resources and services to survivors, regardless of whatever the investigation turns out. And that's what SACI allowed us to do. Imelda is important in my life, and especially to this case, because like she mentioned, she reached out in 2017. Utah SACI had committed a bunch of notifications, either on the sides of buses, through print, or other methods. There was even some news articles on television, and it wanted survivors to know that they could reach out and see what happened to their kid if they had never had any of those answers, which so many, as we've seen in Utah, didn't have those answers. The Psaki program had approximately 5,000 sex assault kits that were partially tested or previously unsubmitted in total. So that's a lot of numbers right there to work through. And with her proactive nature, as you've heard, she reached out. She talked to Lauren, who was our victim advocate at that time. Lauren's an amazing human herself. And as a result of Imelda's efforts, it led to further conversations with the state lab, where we discovered a whole shelf full of partially tested kits. So what started as a small project expanded into a larger, I think they called it Project 3000, if I remember right. There wasn't that many kits, but I think they just rounded it up. But that's a significant number of kits sitting there that had only been tested to serology only or to other outdated DNA methods. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not even going to speak to those.
So just to jump in there for Derek, for anyone watching who's also not a scientist, a partially tested kit is someone like Imelda who has her kit collected, but they might say, oh, there's semen present or saliva present, and maybe they test it with one of the earlier DNA methods that can't go into CODIS now, National DNA Database. So one of the main things under Psaki was to make sure that all the jurisdictions went back to these kits as well, because it was so unfair to say to this victim, oh, well, your kit, we thought it was important. We did some testing that we had available at the time, but we never went back to it. So the whole point of Psaki was to provide the funding and resources so that every victim, every survivor got that chance of getting that DNA that could go into the national database or be compared to persons of interest. So that's a more simple explanation of partially tested kits. So a little bit was done, but not fully to completion.
Well, and I think to kind of piggyback off of that, because that's a great, so where my next thought was going, law enforcement didn't understand the language of scientists. And in 2006, when we got those letters from the lab saying, this has been completed to serology, what do you want us to do next? We didn't understand the language. It wasn't that they were telling us they couldn't do anything. They just never taught us what they meant. And it's on us for not asking questions. So I think it's a multidiscipline problem that we have since worked on to resolve. But with this, it opens up a great opportunity to solve these cases, to provide whatever justice looks like to the survivors in these cases. Imelda, it's taken her decades to get to the point where she finally at least knows things, but it's getting to that point. And at that time, and I'm not justifying anything, I just it's a fact, the partially tested kits were submitted. We expected some big answers from those partially tested kits going in, because if law enforcement had already taken the time to submit it, it was at a time when our state lab was lacked capacity, resources, and personnel to work cases because it wasn't properly funded by our state legislature at that time. And again, that's a systemic issue. That's conversations that have since been resolved because Utah has a tracking system, is funding our lab appropriately. But at that time, the lab was just saying to law enforcement, send us your worst of your worst. So if this was a partially tested kit, we knew this was the worst of the worst, and we expected a DNA result from the further completion of these kits. We identified pretty quickly that we had the potential to link with other crimes, because as a part of the Bureau of Justice Assistance review of all the data coming in, and as Imelda has talked about from her research of the individuals involved in her case, they weren't just committing sex assaults. They were committing other crimes, including homicides. So we could have anything from property crime to the worst of the worst, in my opinion, a sex assault of someone and homicide. And so, again, by creating this program and looking at how offenders are doing these types of crimes, we could potentially prevent future crimes by just simply processing sex assault kits.
Yeah.
Because of that crossover. And in this case, highlight some of the statistics that came out of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is individuals like these two were committing crimes after their sex assault, and it took something significant like a homicide to get them to stop.
Yep.
So that means, could we have prevented future crimes as a result of that? And that has there's so many implications that come from that. We protect people. They don't have to have the experience of PTSD, fear of others in their community. And we have also the economic impacts, how we as society, if we fund these appropriately, we can actually save ourselves money on the backside by preventing these future crimes. Here in Utah, one of my jobs was to track the CODIS hits as they came through. And that was also, at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection is they either had to have connected within Psaki to another sex assault, like a Psaki case, so case to case, or they had a prior conviction for a sex assault, and that made them a serial offender. And our statistics that I recall is Utah was sitting at around 30% were considered serial offenders through the work that we were doing here in Utah. So I know that my partner at that time, Steve O'Cam, and we were hitting out across the state, just trying to spread the word to the most rural agency of Utah that these are important and we have the resources to support you in these cases. A lot of our Utah is under state parks, and we see a lot of crimes occurring on state parks or national parks that because of logistics and jurisdiction issues creates a whole nother issue. So anyway, it was just the whole idea was, let's hold offenders accountable for the things that they do. And I remember my boss at the time, he was Deputy Commissioner Brian Redd. He specifically walked us. We were in the crime lab, and I remember he looked at all the kits on the shelf, and he said, each one of these kits represents a human experience, and we will not deny them their answers. And he was a big force multiplier in the Utah Psaki program. So we got a lot of buy-in at the legislative level because of people like him supporting it. And again, like I was mentioning, or even Imelda had brought up that her agent, the detective at the time of her case, she never heard anything back on what had happened to her case. But that's the other thing is, a lot of these cases, you could have an individual retire and the reports would go to someone, and they wouldn't necessarily open it because it looked just like a subpoena to court or something else. So they weren't taking it as serious at that time. And that's not a justification. It's just improving that process and how we respond to that. And so again, we owe each of these survivors answers to their case. And again, justice looks different for each person. In this case, having worked so closely with Imelda, not only did she want answers, that was like her number one, at least I always perceived, but number two was holding these individuals accountable, particularly the unidentified number two guy. So I remember how much she dug in.
Yeah, Imelda was going to be her own detective and advocate.
She was awesome.
Imelda, like I'm sitting here and what motivated you, or what made you just be like, I am going to call in? Because you hadn't had a great experience. You were living with a lot of trauma and PTSD. You were just trying to be yourself. And then you just decided, I'm going to call in and I'm going to do something. What was there a moment, or had it always kind of been at the back of your mind that when you felt ready and there was an opportunity, you were going to advocate for you?
I think that after the incident and prior to 2016, 2017, like I said, it's something that I've always struggled with mentally and emotionally, being diagnosed with PTSD, depression. It would always it's not something that, it's something that's always there, not something that went away. And so I kind of hit rock bottom. I have a son. I believe he was 6 or 5 at the time. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I have to try to get better, if not for myself, for my son. And so I was at a point that I had hit rock bottom, and I was just like, what is it? What's bothering me? And I knew it was this. I felt like I tried to take care of it and it didn't work out in my favor. I never really tried after I made those phone calls, and they were all in the same day, back to back. And so I knew I had to take care of it. And so I remember just dropping him off at school one day, and I was really upset, and I went to work, and I don't know if it was that same day, the same week, but it was really shortly after. It could have been that same day. I just remember being at work and just browsing the web while I was at work, and coming across this article that I saw on, I believe it was KSL, about the sake. And I read, and I was just like, wow, I can't believe that this whole time, there was no funds for it, or it never went through the full processing because of whatever reason. There was a number. It was, I believe, you guys held a press conference. I think you guys did. Okay, yeah. And then there was a phone number that was given. There was, I think, email address. There was just a lot of information that was very helpful, and it was just saying, reach out to us if you have a case, or if you have any questions. And I remember I reached out and I got connected with Lauren. Um, she was so great. She was very helpful. She made me feel comfortable and safe. And that's something that obviously I didn't have a good experience with law enforcement. And so I remember having a meeting with them, and I think it was the first time I met you guys, Detective Coates and Lauren, and I was hesitant. I went in, and in the back of my head, I was just like, don't trust them. They're not your friends. Be careful. Like, but that, like, I think it was that shortly after I left, or while I was talking to them, I was able to, that wall instantly came down. I felt comfortable. I knew that this was different. My times that I've had bad experience with the detective back in 2018, I remember he had told me it it was before we knew the second suspect. And I remember bringing all this information up to him and telling him, I think it's him, like, look into it. Or I think it was before I brought it up. I don't remember, but I just remember that I had to meet with him. And I remember him telling me, look, this is something that I felt like he was comparing me to other victims, other survivors. One, I don't like that. Personally, I don't like to be compared, because there's victims that don't make it. There's survivors that um, do make it, but they end up getting shot, or physically there's something that they have to live with. And I just don't, every story is different. We handle trauma very differently. And so I felt like he was comparing my story. Not only do I feel like he was comparing my story, he told me that maybe the second suspect was not going to be charged, and maybe we were never going to find out who he was, and that's something that I was just going to have to live with. Oh boy. When he told me that, I remember I just kind of like, I went off, and I was telling him how I felt. I told him how long I've been waiting for this. And I had told them how I'm the one that called. I started initiating all this. And that's not something that I wanted to hear, I expected to hear. And I think that throughout this time, I felt like, unfortunately, me blowing up or having these meltdowns is what has drawn the attention that my case has needed, for someone to take a step back and acknowledge, okay, I do this for a living, but she's a human. this happened to her. She has feelings, and now she wants closure. Let me at least work and see what I can do to bring her that closure. That detective, he was like, situations like that have only been the fuel for me to keep going, to keep pushing. Um, I'm sure that, prosecutors, the detectives, are tired of me. Sometimes they're like me bringing up the defendants and their rap sheet, or reminding them that, two lives were lost, two innocent lives were lost. But I'm going to continue to remind them that this happened, and it shouldn't have happened for me to get my answers. When I found out about Frank's charge, what he was incarcerated for, oh my gosh, that broke me. That little girl was 7 years old. My son was 6 at that time. And so I just lost it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. And I think it like hit so close because, again, my son was just a year younger, and I just couldn't believe it. I don't feel like I just feel like those lives could have possibly or should be here if my case was investigated properly. I remember his defense attorney then also in court saying something. I don't remember the exact words he used, but I was attending virtually, and he said something about when he was explaining to the judge, him dropping him, and I don't know what he was saying, but his excuse to why he could no longer be representing him, he brought up the fact that the defendant was at the time a client or a past client of where he worked. I lost it. I felt like I was humiliated in front of the courtroom. I felt like this was a slap in the face to me because not only had I been waiting 4 years at this time for trial, but I took it as it's in the court's hands now. It's the judge, it's the prosecutors now, and we're allowing him to continue to get away with his way. Um, I always told myself that if I never hated them, I never hated them. I don't feel like I ever had to forgive them. And as awful as this sounds, I can't, maybe I'm just so stuck and so focused on the way it was handled and the way that my case continues to be handled, that it's keeping me busy from focusing on how I truly want to feel towards them. But my feelings are towards, you know, other people, other entities. So I can't hate them. And I feel like I shouldn't have these feelings towards other people or other entities when these two are the ones that committed the crime. But the injustice that I have felt, the injustice that I have seen in my case is what fuels me to keep going and just keep pushing. And I felt like I've had to tell them, this is how you do your job, or do this or do that. And it sucks, but I think we're at where we're at right now is because, you know, I I had to Google some stuff.
That's okay.
And I just can't believe that there's no, how did, I don't know. It's just like, do these entities not share documents, records, or, it's, again, it's just the law. It's a law. The rap sheet is a law. And just prior to what they did to me, they had a rap sheet. And Frank was his charge, I believe, was in 2008. And Jose's charge was in 2007. So Frank was out running the streets for 2 years after he committed this crime against me. Jose was out for a year. So like I said, I just hope that my case is a learning experience for everyone. I hope that things do change. I hope that we can't bring, those two lives back. And who's gonna call the families and tell them this? Who's gonna tell them this? No one is. And so to me, that's my healing.
Well, all I'm going to say is, so about 2022, I sat down with, I think it was finally the third prosecutor in Imelda's case. And in each circumstance, the prosecutor had committed to not leaving this case. But again, political winds shift and things change for them despite good intentions. But this third attorney was the original attorney that started it off. So we had someone that had a history of it at least. And she knew, she had been studying up on the DNA. She had just had a recent case. And so she and I were talking about it. We were in her office, had a discussion, and we called the state crime lab and got one of the DNA section manager. She's an amazing person. I speak highly of her. And she sat on the phone with us and we discussed. We knew that the case scenario was that there were two people and that we needed to find something to test for that. We needed to eliminate or include based on even what Imelda had identified years earlier. And so that manager said, I see this, and she saw two different things, but mainly there was one. There was an intimate body swab, a body swab, and that it ended up being a single source DNA, and it matched exactly what Imelda discussed earlier, with where the suspect number two had put where he had put his mouth in places. So anyway, not only that, StarMix had come online. So even from 2018, when we thought we were doing really good work, to 2023, technology changed even more sensitive, and we got better results than before. And again, I'm not a scientist. I don't even claim to know StarMix and how it does mixtures and yada yada. However, all I know is it's magic, and it came up with that single source DNA profile off of the body swab, and it was able to see the DNA in an intimate body swab. So two different locations, the same DNA profile, which was confirmed through a buccal swab, a confirmation buccal swab from number two, Mr. Cruz. And so that just really helped us lock this case down to where we knew we had the two individuals involved in this. So that was, I think, the best thing ever, to be able to tell Imelda, or however you found out, you were right. I mean, your suspicions were right. And I want you to know, I know that detective that you talked to back in 2018, and he reached out, and he was very, maybe one way with you, but to me, he was just like, I know she's right. He did tell me that he's like, I know that that's the person he was running around with, but how do you tell someone to manage expectations? But regardless, I hear you, and that's how I approached you, Imelda, because the rabbit holes. I knew that if I gave you information, you were going to run with it. However, I committed to you, I would give you the information after I confirmed it, right? Because that was, I wanted you to know I believe you. I knew that what had happened is everything that you described, but I also had told you up front I was going to protect the case. I wanted to be able to give the prosecutor the best case to move forward with. And I think between your partnership with us and your faith in and how we ran it, we got that prosecution. It took a long time to get there, but it's just, whether you look at it as a glass half full or half empty, technology changed in our favor over time to be able to finally and definitively say, yes, these are the two people that committed this horrible act against you and to others.
Yeah, Derek, you just reminded me of something that I always want to tell survivors, especially from SACI, because it was my program for so long. A lot of these cases, I know the survivors were like, why wasn't it tested immediately? The technology like was used in your case, Imelda, just didn't exist. So sometimes that waiting would have been necessary anyway. And I always think about the cases that were tested and all the evidence was consumed and never got that chance. And that doesn't compensate for anything. But I always want to tell survivors when they have a case like this is you got that result pretty much as soon as technology was ready to help get it. And I don't think that makes anything better. But that is the case with all these kits. Sometimes the technology wasn't there to get the answers that survivors deserved.
I feel comfortable speaking with the both of you, and it gives me peace.
This is something that Dr. Williamson and I had talked about at some point is really you today. I know that this is like you've gone through a fire and, you know, it's hardened you. You're like steel now. You are more than that person you were when you were 16. I couldn't be more proud to know you, to have you let me be a part of your life and to help with your case. I mean, because really, as you've seen in all of this, as we talked about, you let it out. It was you calling and it was you following up with the original agency and having them do other stuff. And then eventually they turned it over back to me. And we had a good, I hope you feel that way. I felt like we had a good rapport.
Yes.
One of the things I tell detectives this today, I tell them, don't be afraid to give your phone number, to the person you're representing their case for. So you could have anytime you could contact me. I may not respond immediately, but I'm going to respond. And I want to hear what you have to say. And I want to get your emails. I remember you emailing me a lot of stuff on Frank and Jose. And I'm like, this is good information. And that's what we're going to be doing. But my other thing that I remember about you is how hard you work for your dogs, Molly and Poncho, to make sure that they are safe while you travel to do your work.
Oh, I had no other option.
You're awesome.
Imelda, I just want to end by thanking you for being with us today, and obviously Derek as well. But Imelda, I'd like to give you the last words, and I'd really love for you to share with everyone watching how the recent guilty convictions impacted you. Has it changed your life, hopefully in a positive way? Anything you'd like to share?
So since I've been back from trial was in February. It ended Valentine's Day, February 14th. I am looking forward to not having to have, setbacks or rescheduling of the trial delays or even the reasonings why they're being delayed, the defense attorney asking for more time for nonsense reasons. That is a tremendous weight that's been lifted off my shoulders. For me, my healing, I feel like I felt in a way that I was already kind of healing, but it's two different incidents that I feel like I'm dealing with, the way it was handled, then the way it's continuing to be handled, and the incident itself. I think that right now I do have a couple options that I'm looking into. It can go several ways. I can look into sharing my story, which I feel like would be very helpful for me in sharing my story and hopefully encouraging others to come forward and wanting to know more about their case. I can, it's just, to me, for me, this is the end of it in a way where it's also the beginning, because like I said, there's different routes that I'm looking into taking. Um, uh, not so much. I did expect to like come home and be like, oh my gosh, I'm free, I'm happy. But no, I think that's a lot of work to be done. Like I said, it is very just relieving, not knowing that there's no more dealing with the courts, the delays. I felt like for the longest time, my PTO was always on hold. My life revolved around this, and it should have never revolved around this. I'm looking forward just to be completely free from it.
Okay, thank you again, Imelda and Derek, for joining us today. Thank you for Imelda fighting for yourself, and Derek, thank you for stepping and helping Imelda throughout the process and really epitomizing what the whole Saki program is about, and hopefully what the forward movement in this country is about in helping victims of sexually motivated crimes. Imelda, I hope you and your puppies are well, and that is just an onward and upward journey for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.